could now proclaim how joyful I felt about the recognition of facts surrounding me. I was freed. One could hopefully tell her now that I never believed in those dreamt-of truths, that I could never accept the witnesses' interpretation of the Bible prophecies in regard to the end of the world, which they had been preaching for many decades, and could not accept a God who was ever ready to destroy his beloved creation. I was never a dedicated witness. As mentioned before, I had tried to explain it for years, but all my attempts were ignored and laughed at as if I was joking. They all believed that their dear sister could only have been married to a dedicated brother according to the Bible principles they taught. I had continually felt squeezed into a corner to play the role of a witness, and had been living a life of pretense all the time to please the girl I loved. But if my darling wife truly loved me, she would at least attempt to understand my dilemma, and not treat me like a heap of worthless garbage. However, if her alleged love ceased to exist, which I never believed existed in the first place, I would know for certain that she had never loved me, instead of my dreaming about her supposed love, and her declaration of love remained as if it never existed. I contemplated on her oft-repeated words, "Love can grow." She could not contain her emotions, shouting at me, "So, you were living a life of lies. How can I believe you if you loved me?" I suspected something like this before, and the sisters told me a few things for a long time. They told me, "You are a charming man, and one cannot trust somebody like this, for many women who saw you were desiring you." Taking the opportunity, I asked her what her heart spoke to her, before considering what others told her. Had she ever stopped to ask why? Why did she think I was living with her until now, through thick and thin? "Oh, well," she said, "those sisters never tell lies, you know. Probably, as they told me, you were very close to those other women, and they think, just like I do, those women can only be your sex partners." I asked how she could be so sure about this issue, and she responded with, "Since you are not in the truth, therefore this can be expected. Sisters told me." It was so clear why she had been asking me such questions for years. Was that woman better in bed? Did she have a nicer breath than me? Were her legs nicer than mine? You must have had better sex with them. In addition to this, whenever I felt fatigued or needing a little sleep so that I could be refreshed for the next day's activities, she was always ready to complain about my lack of interest in having a relationship with her in that very tired state of mine, furiously claiming that perhaps the other women had satisfied my needs better, and so I was pretending to be tired, in line with my supposed characteristics. Her being incapable of understanding me was certainly dependent on her feeling insecure in herself and being conditioned by her wonderfully faithful sisters in the truth. I was absolutely certain that she would teach her children to believe that their father was a wicked man, playing around with many other women. Prior to that special visit by the so-called brothers, leading to their judgment and my disfellowshipment, I was no longer frequenting their gatherings, which I used to do just to please Magda. Whenever I preferred to stay home, enjoying beautiful music through the sound system I had built, I was the happiest man in the world, but I could never do so in her presence. I was now more interested in going out into the city, with or without the children. She pressured them to go house to house, preaching activities, or to the Kingdom Hall instead. What bliss it was when she went out on her own for that purpose. I knew by their expressions that the children experienced sadness for not going to the movies as she took them to religious meetings and never took no for an answer. In time, the girls wanted to stay home, listen to music, read storybooks, or behave like normal children until their mother returned. Often I attempted to take them out for outdoor activities, teaching them simple cooking methods or painting techniques. At every opportunity I took lots of photographs of them, especially when out. I felt absolutely free after the break from that awful darkness under extreme pressure from the Jehovah's Witnesses. A short while later she repeatedly told me that our family was breaking apart, and it was likely to become nasty, for we had apparently nothing in common any longer, and I had become very worldly now. She said her children's lives could be poisoned by my involvement in devil worship. I asked her again about what she meant with devil worship, and she answered me saying, "It is psychology. You know, it is psychology. Psychic or psychology, they are just the same as far as I am concerned. Anything that interferes with people's thinking is evil, and as the Bible says, it is devil worship." However, I could never detect any text in the Bible to this effect. Were Jehovah's Witnesses not themselves interfering with people's thinking? If I attempted to quote something from her Bible, she immediately snapped at me, shouting, "How dare you mention something like that from the God's holy book, you devil! God has condemned you as a sinner against the Spirit. How dare you say anything about the Word of God?" That was it. I could not talk anything to her due to being disfellowshipped, for I had apparently sinned against the Spirit, and was scheduled to burn forever in the hellfire, and completely destroyed by their gracious God. Therefore I was also judged and rejected by Magda, the servant of Jehovah. In other words, the witnesses were geared to encourage her, according to their teachings, to separate us, to help the faithful one to live forever. Remember, Jehovah's Witnesses claim they never judge anybody. They leave it all to the Almighty, for He is the only judge in the entire universe. I found it to be most unusual indeed, because if God is the only judge, how can they judge anybody and disfellowship them? Since their governing body replaces Christ, who is the only mediator between God and man, it is impertinent of them presumptuously assume Jesus' role. Remember, He said that man could only reach the Father through Him. Therefore the witnesses prove themselves to be the real Antichrist. Apart from a number of additional studies, my part-time employment, as well as my academic engagements, I was involved in singing and taking minor roles in musicals and theatrical work. I even tried modeling and commercials, acting for television, and working for the press in artistic endeavors. From time to time, my images were presented amongst others for banking or other advertisements. Whenever the children went to places during their school days, on the trains, trams, and buses, they would see their father's image following them. One day Annette told me, "Dad, you always come with us. when we go to places, promptly asking, "You know how?" It was funny how proud and happy they felt when they could show those images to their friends. When Magda became aware of such imagery within the public domain, according to the children, she apparently felt embarrassed to speak about them to her friends. I wondered how she felt deep inside. Maybe she thought that I became too worldly for her liking. According to our daughters, when her witness friends asked her about those advertising images, she preferred to either ignore them or say something like, "But it can be somebody else looking like him." However, she knew they were me, although some of them were with makeup, according to the nature of the advertisement. I felt she was happy about them deep down, but did not wish to be recognized for being the wife of a worldly and materialistic unbeliever. Sometimes she accompanied me to the venues where I was practicing choir singing, and believed she enjoyed it. During one Christmas time, we were to sing several well-known pieces, along with a few Christmas carols, which were to be broadcast on the radio. At first, she was extremely apprehensive to come along and join the audience at Melbourne Town Hall, but decided to come with me nevertheless. She thoroughly enjoyed it, asking me how it was possible that I sang. I said that perhaps she could spare a little time to get to know me better. I tried to explain why I had been practicing singing and playing keyboards at home. Although she appeared to understand what I was considering, was adamant in believing that show business was one of the taboos the witnesses had to consider. Perhaps she needed to consider the parents of the Jackson brothers and even Michael Jackson. However, after that excommunication, many things changed. When I played the role of a bearded nun in the masterly comic Le Comte Henri by Rossini, and some prominent pictures of us were printed on the front page of the daily newspapers, Magda preferred not to know anything about it, completely ignoring it, and even when she had time, did not want to come with me to the regular practices with other singers and actors I had to be a part of. Neither did she want to see the show at the Princess Theatre. It was too worldly for her. However, one discovers in textbook narration that Giacomo Antonio Rossini, 1792 to 1868, was such a grand character in opera, and being able to sing in one of his operas was a great privilege for me. It would be so wonderful to be a part of his greatest farce opera, Barber of Seville, or his Le Conviviali di Matrimonio, which made him very famous. He wrote both comic and magic operas, and I have collected almost all his operatic scores. The Italian in Algiers, The Turk in Italy, Othello, Cinderella, Moses in Egypt, The Lady of the Lake, and Semiramide. He settled in Paris in 1824 and reproduced two of his operas in French, Le Comte Henri and his serious masterpiece William Tell. His health deteriorated, but in 1842 he wrote his religious work Stabat Mater, along with a few small instrumental and vocal pieces, including Péché de vieillesse, Sins of Old Age. Taking part in his opera as one of the bearded nuns was exciting, and a number of pictures of the performing artists, including me, appearing in the daily papers led some people to recognize me in the street, jokingly greeting me as Reverend Mother. But when Magda noticed someone greeting me like that, she felt very embarrassed and promptly asked me why some people called me with those names. "Hope you are not gay, are you?" In short, when her friends commented about what they had seen on television, heard on the radio, or read in the newspapers about my musical and theatrical involvement, she always felt terribly embarrassed, as she never wanted to be identified with a worldly person who could only be a devil worshipper doing evil things. Apparently performing on stage and singing opera was equally evil. Anybody not recognizing God, Jehovah, is seen in the same category as far as the witnesses are concerned. Did she really know what I was doing? Had she ever wanted to know anything other than going house to house and accusing me with all kinds of things she had no idea about? Since no one could serve two masters, either God or the devil, you had to be either the chosen of God or a worldly person, rejected of God. Severe communication problems developed between us. For the sake of peace, I did not interfere whenever she wanted to take the children with her to stay at the premises of her dear brothers and sisters, the other witnesses. I was aware of her reasons for this, primarily because she adored the lifestyle of those most faithful witnesses, with all their God-approved, strict disciplining of children. They never allowed their children to watch television or read anything other than Jehovah's Witness publications. Otherwise, they needed to be severely disciplined. Sending them to bed hungry was one of the teaching points when they skipped praying before meals. If they read a comic book instead of choosing one of the witness magazines, it would attract some other punishment, such as having wooden spoons broken on their buttocks and legs. All these alleged biblical methods of disciplining were apparently approved of Christ and blessed by God. Probably these were only Magda's methods of teaching the children, unless she had been advised to do so by her brothers. I developed a mild phobia in her presence, unsure of what I might be accused of next, needing to be chastised. Magda was spending more time with her friends than ever before, obviously endlessly reading Bible passages with them. Whenever I asked the children what kind of fun they had, they always told me they had to read the Bible. When asked what kind of things they read, their reactions were mixed. They either did not remember what they had read, or were re-studying, or readying themselves to be told off by their mother. They were in extreme fear that they could be punished for not having learned anything holy. They repeatedly told me a story they read about the faithful sheep and the wicked goats, according to Jesus' parables. That was enough for me to understand why they were taught to think as the witnesses saw fit. Remember, I was considered as belonging to the goat category. As previously mentioned, Magda was extremely cautious about our children approaching me in case I attempted to teach them evil things and untruths, whereas they could always approach the brothers and sisters who supposedly never told lies. Even when outside, and those so-called brothers approached to greet them, Annette and Birgit were encouraged to immediately let go of my hands, as if they were holding a dog's tail, and go to those loving brothers, completely ignoring what I was saying. It was extreme, hurtful, and very obvious. Were those brothers pleasing them with special gifts, or extremely personalized treatment, perhaps, since they were the dedicated brothers and sisters? Magda had no choice but trust them in every way. Everything they did and said had to be right, unlike the rest of the world. Eventually, the girls began to show more signs of rebellion, asking their mother things like, why should they just leave Dad? and go to those brothers. That was usually followed by them being chastised, either in front of me or when I was not around. It was extremely hard to swallow. I knew that by her personalized methods of teaching the children, she was very likely to turn them against herself. But when they had only been subjected to hate, which was apparently approved of God, encouraging them to do the same to me, their father, it was going to have a very hypnotic effect on their personalities. We need to remember that hatred was their love in many ways, although they could never see it, yet it was impossible to tell Magda anything like this. She would only listen to her brothers in faith, no matter how ignorant they were in regard to child psychology. This worried me a lot because I knew that her behavior towards me was going to have an adverse, lasting effect on the children. Certainly one day soon, we were not going to stay together as a family. In truth, she was married to Jehovah's Witnesses, not me. In my case, I loved her, but in return, she only loved her faithful brothers and sisters. Remember what she constantly bombarded me with? Love can grow. I wondered about when finally this torture came to an end, how the justice system in this country would deal with it. I am intending to analyze the situation we were in while considering a number of facts, hopefully without making it too complicated. For instance, Magda preferred to happily stay with some of her friends for several days during this stormy period of our relationship, and I took that as her need to relax her mind and have a mini-holiday without worrying about my alleged unfaithfulness. But when back home, the girls declared how happy they were spending time with the children of that other family. I believe that the whole situation was so organized not to give them any opportunity to spend time with someone like me, who supposedly chose the ways of the devil. This was a purposeful brainwashing activity, with a great hope in Magda's heart that our children would only remain within the framework of the Jehovah's Witness faith. Whatever they were to be conditioned with, they were going to build their lives upon it and be totally disordered about their own existence. What I observed was a very drastic confusion in which they would suffer in the long run, developing many kinds of psychological disorders, personal insecurity, self-hatred, psychosis, or pathological narcissism. I sincerely hoped I would be proved wrong. However, no one could ignore the facts regarding Magda, who was not acting on her own. Her general behavior towards me was becoming icier by the day, obviously after being advised in God's ways. She was advised to eventually separate herself from me, the unbeliever, and take the children away from their father, who was not in the truth. I obviously needed to be shunned according to the heartless principles of Jehovah's Witnesses. I am certain that she believed it would be the best action she would undertake. She might also have been advised to try and convince me that I could always come back to the truth. I am certain that she was constantly advised to choose either Jehovah or her unfaithful husband. But in principle, they supposedly had to stay with their husbands. You can guess what she would choose, remembering that she wanted to live forever. I would never recognize this truth, because it had never given me the answers I sought, even to my simplest questions. When I made mention of anything of this nature, they were ever ready to kick me out from their midst, advising my wife to separate from me with the children for her own safety when the world collapsed. She felt duty-bound to save the lives of her children. Therefore, considering any furtherance of a family life with me was extremely dangerous. Most importantly, she preferred to remain faithful to what their leaders demanded of her. She was ready to sacrifice everything. She continued to distance herself from me and encouraged our children to do likewise. She was extremely obsessed with the youngest, our son Claude. She would never let him out of her sight, always taking him everywhere, whether it was shopping or religious activities she adhered to. She was keeping him away from me at every opportunity, as if I was a complete foreigner or criminally insane person who would snatch the boy and disappear, although Annette and Birgit were beginning to sense something was not right, gradually wanting to spend more time with their father. I felt she had even asked her faithful brothers for their advice in this, because, as I briefly mentioned before, a while later she was showing signs of easing when allowing them to go out with me. I was sure that the witnesses had suggested not forcing the girls to only go with her, especially when they wanted to stay with their father. I also knew that it was very hard for her to accept the situation. That may be why she often repeated, "I am sure that even if they don't want to come with me, one day my God Jehovah will grant them wisdom to see who is right." However, she kept indoctrinating them that there was a righteous God who was going to give them eternal life, and all those others, not believing in Jehovah, were condemned to burn in hellfire everlastingly, or completely be annihilated. She told them over and over that she believed in the truth, and made them believe that she only spoke the truth, and everybody who did not follow Jehovah's teachings were liars. I remember when the children asked her about their father, who apparently did not believe in the teachings of Christ, she made sure that they understood her when she explained all about their father, who also belonged to those bad people telling lies. In fact, they were already asking such questions of me. "Dad, you know Mom always tells the truth. Do you tell the truth like Mom does?" That was just so sad. I had a feeling that it was going to remain like this for a very long time, even throughout the rest of their lives. This way, the Jehovah's Witnesses would once again triumph in their achievements. One wondered if Magda would wake up to the real truth one of these days.